Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I want to talk about all the reasons why your leopard gecko might not be eating. I did a video that's similar to this probably back in 2017 or 2018, and since then I've just wanted to create that content again because first of all, it's very old, second of all, I have more information and experience, and third of all, the videos probably weren't super best quality, you know what I'm saying? And they're still not. Don't expect great quality here. At the very least, I wanted to upgrade that content. So this is what we're doing. Now, because I keep so many special needs and rescued and adopted leopard geckos, I have experienced a whole host of reasons why they won't eat. In addition to that, I also have 30 leopard geckos. So having that many gives me quite a bit of variety, whereas like if I only had my boy Fritz, who's my very first leopard gecko, Fritz has never turned down food a day in his life, ever. So like I never would have experienced any of this if I had just had Fritz. So that is one pro to having as many leopard geckos as I do. You get to experience all the range of things. Instead of just having a very easy gecko, you get difficult geckos. These are in no particular order, by the way, but the first reason I'm going to go over is ovulation. I don't have a video yet out about ovulation. It's going to be a very long video, and I have it scripted, I just haven't filmed it yet. I think part of the reason is I have a mental block about that because I have had a lot of trauma, including the passing of Asha. So it's just not a topic that I'm super fond of, but I will be putting that video out someday, so just keep your eyes peeled for that. In short, ovulation is where female leopard geckos create ovarian follicles, and sometimes those can develop into eggs, sometimes they are reabsorbed into the body, sometimes there's issues with that happening. All kinds of problems can happen with ovulation. But during ovulation, a lot of female geckos will go off food. This usually occurs between like February and June of the year, and it's like in the spring months going into summer. But it could occur for a very short period of time, like just like a month or so. You could have some geckos that start earlier than others. You could have some that start later, and it just depends. Like each gecko is different in the way that they experience ovulation, but most geckos when they're ovulating will be food picky or they'll go off food completely. My tip for those times is to be patient and also offer hornworms. Don't go right to waxworms. People automatically go right to waxworms when their gecko is picky. I don't recommend that because it can lead to waxworm addiction and obesity. I do recommend going with an option like hornworms because it's going to be a lot less detrimental to your gecko's health. But if you can get your gecko to eat anything, great. Just try a bunch of different options if you're experiencing a gecko that won't eat. Another reason why your gecko might not be eating is because it's on medication. Obviously, you'll know if your gecko is on medication because you'll be the one administering it, but a lot of times when leopard geckos are on things like antibiotics, they'll go off food. My gecko Benjamin did this, and I had to like mix Rapashi grub pie and give that to him through like a little syringe with his medication so that he was actually eating while he was taking it. But once I stopped the medication, he went right back to eating. He just didn't want to eat on that medication. Another reason why a leopard gecko might not be eating is because it's being food picky. So if you're a kind of person who feeds their leopard geckos the same food all the time, you might experience your gecko being picky. It's basically just them wanting a different type of food. And some have preferences their whole lives. So like some refuse to eat one type of food because they just find it not, palatable. They don't like it. Others request a variety because they're divas, which is good. It's good to offer variety, but some would like to be fed something different each time. Geckos can be picky, just like people can. So keep that in mind. If your gecko isn't eating the food you normally offer, just try something new. Another reason why your gecko might not be eating is brumation. This occurs in the winter and spring months. It typically happens for like a month or two at a time or less. Typically it doesn't last longer than that. And unless you are purposefully brumating your geckos, you might never experience this. It can occur in males and females. It's essentially just reptile hibernation. It's something that they do in nature to preserve their body strength, to preserve their mass, because there's less food and colder temperatures in the wintertime. So it's just kind of like part of their natural rhythm throughout the year. But again, you might never experience it, or you might experience it every year. It's just something to keep in mind. Your gecko might not be eating just because it became cold out and it's darker. There's less daylight, so it's just going into brumation. Another reason your gecko might not be eating, it might not be able to see the food that you're offering. And so if it has impaired vision from old age or from an injury, you'll want to make sure that you are tongue feeding them. That way they can actually get the food. A lot of times people will just like toss crickets in an enclosure and just let the leopard gecko go at it. Even leopard geckos with great hunting skills and good eyesight can miss out on the crickets. So you just have to make sure that if you have a gecko that's a little bit special, that they're getting their food each and every time. Another reason why a leopard gecko might not eat is because it's ill. This could be parasites, it could be bacterial infection, it could be respiratory infection, it could be literally anything. It could be from a tumor inside their body, it could be from cancer, all kinds of stuff. If your leopard gecko isn't eating and you're noticing other distressing signs such as strange or no poops, diarrhea, lethargy, just a general state of like agitation, if they seem restless or if they're sleeping all the time, although that could be brumation. But if you're just noticing that their behavior is different and they're not eating and they just seem off, it's not a bad idea to bring a fecal to your vet or just to consult your vet and see, if everything's on the up and up with them. Another reason why a Leo might not eat is because they don't like the brand of calcium you're using. I know that sounds absurd, but there have been geckos, not only my own, but like other people's I've known, other people's geckos that I've heard of. They don't like the one type of calcium that was dusted on their food. They like a different kind of calcium. And some geckos can be food picky about any type of calcium dusted on their food. For that, I recommend feeding them one without the calcium, and then while they're like chewing that one, you just quickly get another one in there that has calcium on it, or you kind of trick them. You give them something delicious first, and then you give them a different type of food or a food covered in calcium, and they'll think, oh, I'm gonna get the same type of deliciousness that was just offered, and instead they get something that they really weren't wanting. This is a way to get them to eat other foods. It's a way to get them to get calcium in their body. Typically, most geckos are not going to have a problem eating different types of foods or eating different types of calcium, but some can be a little bit picky in that respect, so just keep that in mind. I find that like the chunkier calciums are less favorable, and like the ones that are really fine are more favorable because they can't like feel them as much or smell them as much. The real big chunky calciums, you'll know because it like doesn't sit on the insect evenly, it just like sits in chunks. And then the finer calcium, when you use that, it like creates a nice thin coat on the insect, and that's what you want. You don't want like big chunks of calcium stuck to it, because the gecko just might not like that. Another reason why your gecko might not be eating is because it's in a stressful environment. So if your gecko was just brought home, it could be the stress of having been brought home. If you moved it to a new enclosure, if you changed the decor in its enclosure, if you moved it to a new area of the house, if something in the house has changed, like you got a new pet or someone new moved in, or there's just a lot more noise for some reason, anything that's in their environment that changes can trigger them to not want to eat because they are dissatisfied with or just settling into the new type of environment that they're in. I recommend making sure they feel safe and secure. If you're using an aquarium that has glass sides, block out the sides and the back and just leave the front open. If you're using an enclosure that has only like one hide or two hides and like one piece of decor or one plant, I recommend adding more because it'll allow them to be feeling safer in the enclosure. You have to keep in mind leopard geckos are prey animals, and so like birds from overhead come down at them, and so when they feel not safe in their enclosure, they might not want to eat, might not want to leave their hide. So I always recommend blocking out the sides and giving them more decor. Give them a lot of places to hide, give them a lot of places to feel like, even if they come out of their hide, that there's enough coverage above them by like a piece of driftwood or a big plant that they feel safe, that they're not going to be consumed by a bird. You could also try moving the gecko to a quieter area of the house, or you could try keeping it in a room with the door shut, so like the people or animals that are bothering it don't have that opportunity to bother it. Another reason why a gecko might not be eating is because it's being cohabbed. Cohabbing leopard geckos is problematic for a lot of reasons, but one of those reasons is that one gecko will consume all the food and the other one will not get as much, if any at all. And this is because one gecko will be dominant, and then over time, the gecko that doesn't get to eat the food or doesn't get to stay on the hot side or doesn't get to have a lot of the same opportunities as the dominant gecko, it'll become weaker and weaker and weaker, and it will become frail. It will have metabolic bone disease, or it could have stunted growth. It could be starving. It could have all kinds of problems, malnourishment, stuck shed, literally everything. It is not thriving, whereas the other gecko is thriving more, if that makes sense. I don't recommend cohabbing personally. I just think it's not worth it. There's absolutely no benefit to cohabbing except for the person, because they get to save space having one enclosure instead of two. I don't think there's any benefit. I think you should just keep them by themselves. If you do have your animals cohabbed and you don't intend to separate them, you need to feed them individually. You need to have multiple areas where there's hot hides, and you also need to have multiple humid hides. You're gonna wanna have like 2 or 3 of everything, and an enclosure large enough that they can establish their own territories. You're also gonna wanna make sure they are the same sex. That means there's a girl and a girl. You can't have 2 guys, and you can't have a girl and a guy a male and a female in the enclosure, because the female gecko will just be stressed all the time as the male gecko tries to procreate with her all the time. So again, I really just don't recommend cohabbing, but if you're gonna do it, there's definitely rules you have to follow about it, and so I recommend following the rules that I just mentioned. Another reason why your gecko might not be eating is because you have improper temperatures and husbandry. If your humidity is too high or too low, if your temperatures are too high or too low, if your gecko is having issues like thermoregulating because there's not enough space in the enclosure to move from the warmth to the cool. It's just a lot of things that could go wrong. You could be supplementing wrong. Anything that's a husbandry issue has to be addressed in order for the gecko to start eating again and to be healthy. So just make sure that your husbandry is ideal. Now, of course, if your gecko was eating for a long time and then suddenly stops eating, it's probably not a husbandry issue. This is going to be for people who like just started keeping them, or if you're not using like a thermostat with your heat mat, for example, and your heat mat just gets way too hot, or if you have a thermostat that's no longer functional, it broke and now your temperatures are all over the place. There's a lot of things. Just make sure you double check your husbandry and then check and see what other reasons there are that it might not be eating. Another reason that your gecko might not be eating is because it doesn't like how you offer food. So like, maybe it prefers to bowl feed, maybe it prefers to tongue feed, maybe it prefers to free hunt in its enclosure, maybe it prefers to eat outside its enclosure. I'm gonna say I doubt that on that one. I think you'll have a lot more success feeding it inside its enclosure, but I'm just saying maybe the way that you're offering food just isn't working for them. So just try a few different things. If you were already offering food in a bowl, try offering with tongs. If you were already offering tongs, try offering a bowl or free hunting. Try different methods to see what works for your gecko. Another reason why your leopard gecko might not be eating is that it actually is in fact eating. You just don't see it eating. So if you're the kind of person that just like tosses insects in the enclosure and you don't watch it eat, you might think it's not eating because you don't see it eat, but that doesn't mean it's not eating. Now, likely you'd see the insects in the enclosure, unless they're crickets, because those things crawl out. I loathe crickets very much. I can't stand them. But just make sure that your gecko is actually eating, like you visually see your gecko eating. Another reason why your leopard gecko might not be eating is because if you try to offer insects that are not live, or if you try to offer food that is not a live insect, they might just not be down for that. Leopard geckos are insectivores. They like to hunt moving insects. So if you're offering like a frozen or canned insect, or if you're offering something that's not an insect at all, they might not want that food. So if you're not comfortable feeding live insects, a leopard gecko is not the pet for you. Okay, so I think that's all the reasons. At least that's all the reasons I have written down. If I have forgotten one, which I am only human, it's very possible, please let me know down below. And if you think I didn't cover the reason why yours isn't eating, check down below as well, and also check other resources. I am only one person. I can only speak from my own experiences, so I recommend going ahead and checking out other people and other forums and other articles as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all the good stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!